A single drop of crimson wine cascades in slow motion, a harbinger of ruin. For Catherine, a struggling waitress, it's the end of her job. For Brent Covington, the millionaire CEO whose $1,000 suit it just stained, it's a trivial power play, a moment to crush someone he sees as insignificant. He stands over her, his voice like ice, and utters the words that will shatter her world. You're fired. But in the cold, steel and glass towers of corporate power, secrets are the real currency. What Brent doesn't know is that the woman he just humiliated isn't just a waitress. She's a ghost from the company's past, and she's about to become his worst nightmare. This isn't a story about a bad day at work. It's a story of calculated revenge, a hidden legacy, and the moment a titan of industry learns a terrifying lesson, be careful who you step on, because you might just be looking at your new boss. The air in Aria Ristorante was thick with the scent of money. It wasn't just the truffle oil drizzled over handmade pasta or the aged leather of the banquettes. It was an intangible aroma of power of deals being signed over plates of seared scallops and glasses of vintage Bordeaux. For the patrons, Aria was a stage. For the staff, it was a tightrope. Catherine Kate Peterson knew the tightrope better than anyone. For the past 7 months, she had navigated its treacherous length with a quiet determination that bordered on invisibility. She was, by all accounts, an exemplary waitress. Her uniform was always perfectly pressed, her smile was polite but never familiar, and her movements were efficient, a silent ballet of clearing plates and refilling water glasses. Her colleagues, a mix of career servers and aspiring artists, saw her as steady, reliable, and perhaps a little bland. They knew she was saving up for something, college maybe, or a trip, but she never offered details, and they never pressed. Tonight the restaurant was humming with its usual Friday evening intensity. A low, powerful murmur of conversations filled the space, punctuated by the clinking of heavy silverware against fine china. Kate moved through it all her mind, a running checklist. Table 7 needed their check, the couple at table 12 was ready for dessert menus, and table 9, her most demanding of the night, needed another bottle of the San Pellegrino, served with exactly 2 lime wedges. Not 1, not 3. Her focus was absolute. It had to be. This job was more than a paycheck. It was a penance, a mission, and the final leg of a journey she had begun in grief and confusion. She would glance at the well-dressed men and women, their confident laughter echoing in the opulent room, and feel a pang of something she couldn't quite name. It was a phantom limb of a life she once knew, a world she had been violently ejected from. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, demanding snap of fingers from the corner booth, the best table in the house. The king's seat. And tonight the king was Brent Covington. Brent Covington, CEO of Peterson Global Holdings. The name was a bitter pill Kate had to swallow daily. He was everything she despised, wrapped in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit. He was young for a CEO, just 38, with a mane of slicked-back, dark hair, a jaw that seemed permanently clenched in arrogant certitude, and the cold, predatory eyes of a shark that had just scented blood. He hadn't built Peterson Global. He had seized it. Kate took a deep breath, her knuckles white around the silver tray she was holding. She smoothed a non-existent crease on her apron and approached the table. "Mr. Covington," she said, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of professional courtesy. "How can I assist you?" Brent didn't look at her. His attention was fixed on the man sitting across from him, a potential investor from Singapore named Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen was older, with a placid, observant face that revealed nothing. "Another bottle of the Tignanello," Brent commanded, waving a dismissive hand towards the half-empty bottle on the table. "And be quicker about it this time. The ice in my water has melted. Are you blind? Kate's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before her training took over. Of course, sir. Right away. She turned to leave her back, ramrod straight. She could feel his eyes on her, not seeing her, but seeing a uniform, an object, an extension of his will. The humiliation was a familiar, hot flush on her neck. This was the price of admission. This was the test. She retrieved the bottle from the cellar, her hands steady despite the tremor in her soul. The 1997 Tignanello. $800 a bottle. A week's salary for her. A rounding error for him. She remembered her father, Arthur Peterson, swirling a glass of this exact vintage in his study, his eyes twinkling. You don't just drink wine like this Katie girl, he'd said. You listen to it. It tells you a story of the sun, the soil, the hands that made it. It's about respect. Respect was a foreign concept to Brent Covington. He had taken over her father's company, Peterson Global, in a brutal, hostile takeover, a year after Arthur's sudden death from a heart attack. He had painted Arthur as a relic, an old-fashioned leader who was out of touch with the modern market. Brent was the future lean, mean, and utterly ruthless. He'd slashed departments, laid off hundreds of loyal long-term employees, and liquidated assets her father had spent a lifetime building, all to inflate the stock price and line his own pockets. He had erased Arthur Peterson, and in doing so, he had erased Kate. She had been a 24-year-old art history graduate working in the company's philanthropic foundation when Covington had swept in. Her position, along with the entire foundation, was deemed a non-essential luxury. She was dismissed with a sterile HR letter and a security guard escorting her from the building her father had built. So she had become a ghost, a waitress, a nobody. All according to plan. A plan she and her father's oldest, most trusted friend had concocted. She returned to the table, the heavy bottle feeling like a weapon in her hands. She presented the label to Brent as required. He didn't even glance at it. Just open it. He snapped deep in a monologue about third-quarter revenue projections. Kate's hands moved with practiced grace. She sliced the foil, twisted the corkscrew, and eased the cork out with a barely audible sigh. This was the most dangerous part of the service. She leaned over her arm, extended between Brent and Mr. Chen to pour a small tasting amount into Brent's glass. The space was tight, a canyon of tension between the two men. She focused on the stream of dark, ruby liquid, her breath held tight in her chest. Everything depended on getting through these last few weeks unnoticed. She just needed a little more time. As she began to pour, Brent laughed loudly at his own joke, gesturing expansively with his hand. The back of his hand struck her wrist. Not hard, but it was unexpected, a sudden jarring impact. The bottle jerked. A stream of red wine, dark as blood, missed the glass entirely and splashed across the pristine white cuff and grey sleeve of Brent Covington's suit. The world seemed to stop. The murmur of the restaurant faded into a deafening silence in Kate's ears. All she could see was the dark, spreading stain, a map of her own destruction. Brent Covington slowly lowered his arm and looked down at his sleeve. He didn't shout. He didn't explode. The silence that emanated from him was far more terrifying. He lifted his cold reptilian gaze from his ruined suit and fixed it on her. For the first time all night he was truly looking at her, and in his eyes she saw not just anger, but a cruel, chilling delight. The delight of a predator that had just been given a reason to kill. Time snapped back into motion, but it was a cruel, distorted version of reality. Mr. Chen looked on with an expression of mild, impassive curiosity, as if watching a nature documentary. The diners at nearby tables, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, fell quiet, their forks hovering over their plates. All eyes were on the corner booth, where a waitress stood, frozen a bottle of expensive wine in her hand, and a powerful CEO stared at a rapidly spreading stain. Kate's mind raced a frantic search for the right words, the correct protocol. "Mr. Covington, I am so sorry. It was an accident. Please allow me to don't touch me." Brent's voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a shard of glass. He held up his hand, not to stop her, but as if she were something contaminated, he was warding off. He slowly, deliberately placed his napkin on the table. He looked at his ruined sleeve, then back at Kate. A slow, contemptuous smile spread across his lips. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed this, who savored the opportunity to exercise his power in its most naked and petty form. "An accident," he repeated, his voice rising just enough to carry. "An accident is when a clumsy child spills their milk. This is incompetence. This is what happens when you hire people from the gutter who have no business being in a place like this." Every word was a physical blow. Kate could feel the blood drain from her face. She could feel the stares of every person in the room, pity from some, morbid curiosity from most. "Sir, I assure you it was not my intention," she began, her own voice sounding thin and reedy to her ears. "Your intention?" Brent laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your intention is irrelevant. Do you have any idea what this suit costs?" "Of course you don't. It's more than you make in 6 months of slopping food onto plates. This is a Xenia custom-tailored. The material is ruined, utterly ruined." He wasn't just angry, he was performing. He was demonstrating his status to Mr. Chen, showing him that the world and everyone in it was subject to his whim. He was making an example of her. The restaurant manager, David, a kind but perpetually stressed man in his 50s, hurried over. His face was pale, his eyes darting between his star waitress and his most powerful patron. "Mr. Covington, is there a problem?" David asked, his voice trembling slightly. Brent turned his chilling gaze on David. "A problem? Yes, David, there is a problem. The problem is that your establishment employs clumsy, worthless staff who can't be trusted to perform the simplest task without causing thousands of dollars in damage." "I am terribly, terribly sorry," Sir David said, bowing his head slightly. "We will, of course, cover the full cost of cleaning and any necessary repairs for the suit. Your entire meal is complimentary naturally." Brent scoffed. "Cleaning? Don't be absurd. This is a delicate wool-silk blend. It's finished. And I don't want a complimentary meal. I want satisfaction." He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Kate, who stood rooted to the spot, a statue of humiliation. "I want her gone. Not at the end of her shift. Not tomorrow. Now. I want to watch her walk out of that door, knowing she no longer has a job because of her breathtaking stupidity." David's face went from pale to ashen. He looked at Kate, a flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes. He knew her work. He knew she was one of his best. But Brent Covington wasn't just any customer. Several major corporate events for Peterson Global were booked at Aria's private dining rooms for the next quarter. Losing that business would be catastrophic. David was trapped. "Mr. Covington, perhaps we can discuss this privately," David pleaded. "There is nothing to discuss," Brent said, his voice reaching a new level of cold finality. "Either she is fired on the spot in front of everyone, or I will not only never set foot in this restaurant again, but I will make it my personal mission to ensure that no one from my company or any company I do business with ever does either. I will ruin this place, David. Do you understand me?" It was a checkmate, a public execution. David's shoulders slumped in defeat. He couldn't meet Kate's eyes. He turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. "Catherine, please, get your things from the locker room. I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Kate felt a strange sense of calm descend upon her, the kind of clarity that comes after the worst has already happened. The plan had been to endure to remain invisible. But Brent, in his infinite arrogance, had thrown a grenade into the whole operation. He hadn't just singled her out, he had made a spectacle of it. She placed the Tignanello bottle carefully on a nearby serving stand. She untied her apron, the simple black fabric suddenly feeling like a costume she was shedding. She folded it neatly and placed it next to the wine. She did it all with a slow, deliberate grace that seemed to infuriate Brent even more. There was no crying, no pleading, just a quiet, dignified acceptance that felt like defiance. She finally looked up her gaze, sweeping past the sympathetic face of David, past the uncomfortable stare of Mr. Chen, and landing squarely on Brent Covington. For a long moment, their eyes locked. His were filled with triumphant cruelty. Hers, for the first time since he'd known her as the waitress, held a flicker of something else. Not fear, not anger. It was something colder, harder. It was the look of a debt being recorded, of a score being settled in a ledger he didn't even know existed. Without a word, she turned and walked away from the table. The silence in the restaurant was so complete that her soft-soled shoes seemed to echo on the polished hardwood floor. She walked past the other waiters and kitchen staff, who averted their eyes as if she were a ghost. She walked through the swinging doors into the kitchen, past the heat and the noise and the smells that had been her world. She didn't stop at her locker. There was nothing in it she needed. The worn-out sneakers, the spare set of clothes, the dog-eared paperback, they were all part of a life that had just been publicly immolated. She walked straight through the kitchen, pushed open the heavy staff exit door, and stepped out into the cool night air of the back alley. The door clicked shut behind her, plunging the alley into relative silence, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic. She leaned against the cold brick wall, the adrenaline finally starting to recede, leaving a hollow, shaking emptiness in its wake. She had failed. 7 months of swallowing her pride, of living a lie, of being inches from the finish line, and it was all destroyed by one arrogant man and one spilled glass of wine. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sharp. She squeezed them shut, refusing to let them fall. Not for him. Never for him. A quiet footstep echoed in the alley. She looked up, expecting a dishwasher on a smoke break or a sympathetic colleague. Instead, she saw a figure emerge from the shadows at the far end of the alley near the main street. It was an older man in an impeccably tailored but understated grey suit. He held a phone to his ear. "Yes, it's done," the man said, his voice calm and steady. "The catalyst. It happened exactly as we anticipated it might." He took the bait. "Yes, she's right here. I'm with her now. The board meeting is set for 10 a.m. tomorrow. It's time." The man lowered his phone, and his kind, familiar eyes met hers across the length of the grimy alley. It was Walter Hemmings, her father's best friend, his former COO, and the only other person on earth who knew the truth. He walked toward her, his expression a mixture of sympathy and steely resolve. He didn't just fire a waitress, Kate, Walter said, his voice low and firm. He just rang the bell for the main event. The alley was a stark contrast to the opulence of Aria's interior. The air smelled of damp cardboard and dishwater. A single flickering fluorescent light cast long dancing shadows against the brick. For Kate, it felt like a backstage area where the actors took off their masks. Walter Hemmings stopped a few feet from her, his presence a comforting anchor, in the swirling chaos of her emotions. Walter was in his late 60s with a full head of silver hair and eyes that had seen decades of corporate battles. He had been Arthur Peterson's right-hand man, the calm strategist to Arthur's visionary leadership. When Brent Covington had seized control, Walter had been one of the few senior board members he couldn't dislodge due to an ironclad contract and a significant block of shares. He had become the resistance, the inside man waiting for the right moment. "Are you all right?" Walter asked, his voice laced with genuine concern. Kate pushed herself off the wall, wrapping her arms around her torso. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "He's even worse up close. The arrogance, the cruelty. It's not just business for him, Walter. He enjoys it. He enjoyed doing that to me." "I know," Walter said, his expression grim. "I've been watching him operate for over a year. He sees people as tools or obstacles. Nothing in between. That's why your father worried?" Kate looked down at her simple black uniform trousers and thin blouse. "So this is it. The plan is ruined. 7 months of this for nothing." He saw me, Walter. He knows my face now. "When I walk into that boardroom tomorrow," Kate Walter interrupted gently, "look at me. The plan is not ruined. It has been accelerated. In fact, what happened in there might be the best thing that could have happened." She stared at him, confused. "The best thing, I was publicly humiliated and fired. He made me look like a fool." "He made himself look like a fool," Walter corrected. "Who was he trying to impress, Mr. Chen from the Singaporean Sovereign Wealth Fund?" "I happen to know Mr. Chen. His own father built their family empire from a single fishing boat. He values humility and despises arrogance. Brent's little power play tonight didn't project strength. It projected insecurity and appalling poor judgment. He may have just cost himself a 10-figure investment." Walter's words began to cut through her panic. He was right. She had been so focused on her own humiliation that she hadn't considered the larger chessboard. "But what about me?" she asked. "He'll recognize me." And that, Walter said with a thin, strategic smile, is the point. "We were going to have to explain who you were and why you were working at ARIA anyway. This way we don't have to explain. We get to demonstrate. Every single board member will hear about what happened tonight. I'll make sure of it. They will hear that Brent Covington, in a fit of pique, publicly destroyed a low-level employee over a spilled drink. And then tomorrow that same employee will walk into the boardroom." He let the implication hang in the air, the sheer dramatic force of it. "This was always your father's final gambit," Kate Walter continued, his voice softening as he mentioned his friend. "He knew Covington was circling even before he got sick. He saw the rot in the financial world, the shift from building companies to simply raiding them. He was worried Peterson Global would fall into the hands of a man who would tear out its soul for short-term profit." Kate's memory flashed back to the painful months after her father's death. The lawyers, the confusing documents, the feeling of being utterly lost. It was Walter who had pulled her aside and explained Arthur's true legacy. It wasn't just the company. It was a failsafe. Arthur Peterson, knowing his heart was failing, had restructured his will and the company's bylaws in secret. His controlling 51% stake in Peterson Global was not left directly to Kate. Instead, it was placed into a blind trust. This trust had 2 specific, unalterable conditions. First, the shares would only vest to his heir upon their 25th birthday. Kate's birthday was next week. Second, and this was the masterstroke, the heir had to have been gainfully employed for a minimum of 6 consecutive months in a non-executive customer-facing role at any business majority owned by Peterson Global, the holding company in its vast portfolio owned dozens of businesses, from manufacturing plants to tech startups. It also, through a subsidiary real estate division, owned the building that housed Aria Ristorante, making the restaurant technically a tenant, and by a clever legal clause, Arthur had inserted part of the corporate ecosystem. He wanted you to understand the people who are the foundation of this company, Katie Walter had explained to her all those months ago. He always said, you can't lead from a skyscraper if you've never stood on the ground floor. He wanted you to see the company not as a number on a stock ticker, but as a collection of human beings. And he wanted you to be shielded until you were ready. The plan had been for Kate to quietly finish her required time at Aria Resign, and then, on her birthday, Walter would call the special board meeting to execute the transfer of power. It was supposed to be clean, clinical, and shocking. Brent's ego just handed us a better narrative, Walter said, pulling her back to the present. He's not just a ruthless CEO anymore. He's a bully. He picked on a waitress, and tomorrow that waitress is going to take his job. It's poetic. Your father would have appreciated the irony. A black town car with tinted windows pulled up to the curb at the end of the alley. The driver's door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out, holding the rear door open for them. "Come on," Walter said, gesturing toward the car. "You've spent enough time in the trenches. Your last shift is over. You have a busy night ahead of you." Kate looked at him, a new light dawning in her eyes. The shame and fear were finally burning away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "What do I need to do?" "First, you're going to go home, have a hot shower, and throw away that uniform forever. Then you are going to get some sleep. While you do that, my team will be preparing your portfolio. At 7 a.m., we will meet at my office. We are going to go over the quarterly reports, the current asset valuations, and the profiles of every single board member, their loyalties, their weaknesses, their price. When you walk into that room at 10 o'clock, you will not be Catherine Peterson, the waitress. You will not even be Arthur Peterson's daughter. You will be the majority shareholder of Peterson Global, and you will know more about the state of your company than the man sitting at the head of the table." Kate nodded, the final traces of the timid waitress vanishing. She looked back at the door to Aria Ristorante one last time. It was a portal to a different life, a chapter that was now definitively closed. Brent Covington thought he had fired her. He had no idea what he had truly done. He had taken a ghost and given her form. He had taken an heiress in hiding and pushed her onto the throne. She walked towards the waiting car, her steps sure and steady. The alley was no longer a place of shame. It was the starting line. Tomorrow, the real story would begin. The next morning, the view from the 50th floor boardroom of Peterson Global Tower was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic vista of the city, a concrete and glass jungle stretching to the horizon under a crisp, clear sky. But inside the room, the atmosphere was anything but clear. It was thick with tension, unspoken alliances, and the predatory stillness of a pack of wolves sensing a shift in the hierarchy. The boardroom itself was a monument to Brent Covington's ego. Gone was the warm mahogany and classic art her father had favored. Brent had replaced it all with a stark, modernist aesthetic of black marble chrome and smoked glass. The centerpiece was a colossal, monolithic table that could seat 30, its polished surface reflecting the nervous faces of the board members as they took their seats. Brent Covington stood at the head of the table, a position he occupied like a king on his throne. He was dressed in another immaculate suit, a dark navy pinstripe that probably cost more than the car Kate used to drive. There was no sign of the previous night's incident, save for a faint, almost imperceptible tightness around his eyes. He exuded an air of supreme, unshakable confidence, pacing, slowly sipping from a mug of what was undoubtedly some exotic, expensive coffee. He was enjoying this. The emergency board meeting had been called by Walter Hemmings, citing a clause in the corporate bylaws that Brent had always found irritatingly antiquated. He assumed the old man was going to make some final pathetic stand a motion about ethics, a complaint about recent layoffs. Brent looked forward to swatting him down like a fly. The board members filed in a collection of men and women who owed their positions and their generous compensation packages to one of two people, Arthur Peterson or Brent Covington. There was George Maxwell, head of the acquisitions department, a Covington man, through and through. He was slick, ambitious, and mirrored Brent's own ruthlessness. He sat to Brent's right, his sycophantic second-in-command. There was Maria Flores, a sharp, pragmatic woman who had been on the board for 15 years, appointed by Arthur. She was a holdover respected for her keen financial mind, but she had remained carefully neutral during Covington's reign, playing her cards close to her chest. She watched everyone with intelligent, calculating eyes. And then there were the others, the nervous ones, who feared Brent, the opportunistic ones who saw him as their ticket to wealth, and the few like Walter who remembered a different time, a better company. Walter Hemmings entered last. He was not accompanied by a high-priced lawyer, as Brent had expected. Instead, he walked in alone, carrying a simple, leather-bound portfolio. He moved with an unhurried calm that seemed to suck the air out of Brent's confident posture. Walter didn't take his usual seat down the side of the table. Instead, he walked to the far end opposite Brent and remained standing. Walter Brent said, his tone dripping with condescension, "Glad you could make it. I trust this interruption to our busy schedules will be worth our time." Some pressing matter concerning the color of the new letterhead, perhaps? A few of Covington's allies chuckled nervously. Walter did not smile. "Thank you for convening the board on such short notice," Brent Walter said, his voice level and clear, easily filling the large room. "I can assure you this matter is of the utmost importance. It concerns the leadership and controlling interest of Peterson Global. That got everyone's attention." The nervous chuckles died. Brent's smile tightened. He put down his coffee mug with a soft click. "The leadership," Brent said, raising an eyebrow. "As far as I'm aware, the leadership is quite secure. Our stock is up 30% since I took over. We've trimmed the fat, and our profitability has never been higher." Profitability, yes, Walter conceded. But a company is more than its stock price. Arthur Peterson knew that, and he made provisions to protect his legacy from those who might forget it. Brent let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Ah, yes. The ghost of Arthur Peterson. Walter, we all respected Arthur, but his time has passed. The market has changed. We can't be held back by sentimentality." "This isn't about sentimentality," Walter replied, his eyes locking onto Brent's. "This is about bylaws, specifically corporate bylaw. 7 Section 4A, regarding the disposition of the founder's shares held in the Peterson Family Trust." Brent's expression flickered. He knew of the trust, of course, but his lawyers had assured him it was a non-issue, a time-locked inheritance for a daughter who was no longer involved with the company. "The trust is sealed until the heir's 25th birthday," Brent said dismissively. "It's a private family matter. It has no bearing on company operations." "On the contrary," Walter said, his voice hardening slightly. "The heir's 25th birthday is this coming Tuesday, and the trust contains a controlling interest, 51% of all voting shares. Furthermore, the vesting of those shares was contingent upon a condition that has now been met." A murmur went through the room. Board members shifted in their seats, exchanging confused and worried glances. George Maxwell leaned forward, a sneer on his face. "What condition? What are you talking about?" Hemmings Walter ignored him, his focus entirely on Brent. "The condition established by Arthur himself was that his heir must complete 6 months of continuous non-executive employment within the Peterson Global corporate family. A way to ensure his successor understood the company from the ground up. Brent's confident facade finally began to crack. He was connecting dots, but they were forming a picture he couldn't comprehend. And his daughter was fired from the foundation over a year ago. The condition is void. It's irrelevant. She was not fired, Walter corrected him coldly. Her position was eliminated, a crucial legal distinction. It left her free to seek other employment. Which she did. Walter paused, letting the silence stretch, building the tension to an unbearable peak. He savored the moment, the culmination of a year of secrecy and planning. For the last 7 months, Walter announced his voice, ringing with authority. The sole heir to the Peterson Trust. Catherine Peterson has been employed as a food service professional at Aria Ristorante, a business located in a property owned by this corporation, fulfilling the conditions of the trust to the letter. The room erupted in shocked gasps and frantic whispering. Brent Covington stared at Walter, his face a mask of disbelief, his mind scrambling to process the information. A waitress, the girl from last night. It was impossible. It had to be a trick. That's absurd, Brent finally exploded, slamming his hand on the marble table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. You can't be serious. That clumsy little... She can't be. She can. Walter said, his voice dropping to a near whisper filled with ice. And last night, Brent, you provided her with a public, undeniable and widely witnessed termination of that employment. You effectively signed the final document yourself, confirming the completion of her service. Walter turned towards the grand double doors of the boardroom. And now, he said, his voice rising again, clear and triumphant. I believe it's time you were formally introduced. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, allow me to present the new majority shareholder and chairperson of Peterson Global. Please meet your new boss. The double doors swung open, and Catherine Peterson walked in. If the room had been silent before, it was now a vacuum. Every ounce of air, sound, and movement seemed to have been sucked out by the figure standing in the doorway. This was not the woman from the restaurant. Gone was the ill-fitting, functional black uniform. Gone was the tired, deferential posture. Gone was the ghost. In her place stood a woman radiating a quiet but immense power. Kate was dressed in a tailored dark charcoal grey pantsuit that was the sartorial equivalent of armor, elegant, sharp, and commanding. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek professional chignon, revealing the strong lines of her face, a face that held her father's intelligent eyes, and a resolve that was entirely her own. She carried a slim tablet in one hand. She looked in every respect like she owned the room. Which, of course, she now did. Her eyes, cold and clear, swept across the stunned faces around the table. She saw the open-mouthed shock of George Maxwell, the dawning, calculating comprehension on Maria Flores's face, and the panicked confusion of the others. Finally, her gaze landed on Brent Covington. Brent stared at her as if he'd seen an apparition. His face, normally tanned and smug, was a ghastly, pale white. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He was looking at the waitress, the clumsy, insignificant girl from last night, but the person standing before him was a stranger. No. He breathed the word barely audible. It's a trick, a pathetic little coup attempt. Hemmings. You think you can pull this? He pointed a shaking finger at Kate. This is nobody. Kate took a step into the room, the sound of her heels on the marble floor, a sharp, definitive counterpoint to Brent's sputtering. She walked not to the end of the table with Walter, but along the side, her eyes never leaving Brent. "Hello, Brent," she said. Her voice was not the timid whisper he remembered. It was calm, measured, and resonated with an authority that chilled him to the bone. "I believe we met last night. You were displeased with my service." The sheer audacity of her statement, the calm reference to her own humiliation, stunned the board into silence again. Brent finally found his voice, a sputtering rage building. "This is insane. The board will not stand for this. This is my company. Was it ever truly yours?" Kate asked, her tone conversational yet lethal. She stopped halfway down the table, directly opposite Maria Flores, who watched her with a newfound respect. "You didn't build it. You took it. You took my father's life's work, and you treated it like a junk car to be stripped for parts. You talk about profitability, but what about integrity? What about loyalty? What about the 400 employees from the Dayton manufacturing plant you laid off 2 months before Christmas to create an artificial stock bump for your own bonus?" She tapped her tablet, and the main screen on the wall behind Brent flickered to life. A list of names appeared. These were people with families. Many had worked for Peterson Global for over 20 years. "You called it trimming the fat. My father called them the family." Brent was on his feet now, his face contorted with fury. "This is a boardroom, not a bleeding heart charity. We are here to create value for our shareholders. I am the shareholder." "Mr. Covington," Kate shot back, her voice ringing with power. "The majority shareholder. And it seems my idea of value differs from yours." Walter Hemmings stepped forward, placing his leather portfolio on the table. He opened it and addressed the entire board. "For your verification," he said calmly, "I have here the last will and testament of Arthur Peterson, the charter for the Peterson Family Trust, notarized records of Miss Peterson's employment, and the formal transfer of share control executed by the trustees this morning at 9 a.m. as per the vesting conditions. It is all legally binding and irrevocable. Catherine Peterson now controls 51% of this company." He slid a copy of the key documents across the polished table towards the board's general counsel, a nervous man named Stevens, who picked them up with trembling hands. Brent watched him, his mind working furiously, searching for an angle, a loophole. "This is a conspiracy," No Kate said, taking another step closer to him. "This is a consequence. This is the result of a man who believed a company should have a soul, a man who anticipated that someone like you might one day try to rip it out. This was his last line of defense. Me." She finally reached the head of the table, standing just a few feet from him. They were face to face now, the fired waitress and the Titan CEO. But the power dynamic had been inverted with dizzying speed. "You know, last night you told me something," Kate continued, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost intimate tone that made it all the more menacing. "You told me I was incompetent, worthless, that I came from the gutter and had no business being in a place like Aria." She paused, letting her words hang in the dead air. "For 7 months I cleaned up after men like you. I listened to your bragging. I tolerated your condescension. I served your overpriced wine. I saw the rot of this company, not on a balance sheet, but in the character of the man leading it. My father's contingency wasn't just a legal maneuver, Brent. It was an education. And last night you were my final exam." She leaned in slightly, her eyes like chips of ice. "And you failed." Brent stared at her, speechless. The fury was gone, replaced by the dawning horrific realization that he had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. He hadn't just been beaten, he had been the author of his own demise. His arrogance, his cruelty, the very traits he thought made him strong, had been the weapons used against him. He had personally tripped the wire on a trap he never knew existed, The boardroom remained a tableau of suspended animation. The board members who minutes ago were secure in their positions within Brent Covington's empire now looked between him and Kate like spectators at a tennis match where one player had suddenly revealed the other's racket was made of string cheese. Brent's mind, a machine and usually humming with predatory calculations, was sputtering, failing. He grasped for the one thing he always relied on: intimidation. "This is a farce," he snarled, though the words lacked their usual bite. He turned to the board members, appealing to their self-interest. "Are you all going to sit here and let this child, this waitress, take over a multi-billion-dollar corporation, George Maria?" "Say something." George Maxwell, ever the loyal lieutenant, puffed out his chest. "She's right, Mr. Covington. This is unprecedented. We can't just hand over control based on some dusty old clause. We need to verify, to litigate." Kate didn't even look at him. Her focus was entirely on Brent. Litigate by all means. Tie up the company in court for years while your stock plummets and your investors flee. Let the first act of your challenge be deposing me where I can recount under oath the character of the man who publicly fired me for spilling a drink he caused me to spill. I wonder how that will play on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The color drained from George's face. He sank back into his chair as if deflated. Kate then turned her gaze to Maria Flores. Maria the pragmatist had been silent, her sharp eyes assessing every angle. She had survived the transition from Arthur to Brent by being smart, not sentimental. "Ms. Flores, Kate," said her tone respectful, but firm. "You've been with this company for 15 years. You knew my father. You know what this company was. And you see what it has become. You're a businesswoman. You understand that stability and clear leadership are paramount. What do you see as the best path forward for Peterson Global right now?" It was a brilliant move. She wasn't asking for loyalty to her father's memory. She was appealing to Maria's core pragmatism. Maria looked from Kate's unshakable calm to Brent's unraveling fury. The choice from a purely strategic standpoint was obvious. Maria Flores took a deliberate breath and folded her hands on the table. "The bylaws seem clear. Mr. Hemmings has presented the documentation, and the chain of succession is legally defined. As a board, our fiduciary duty is to the shareholders. And as of this morning, Miss Peterson is the shareholder. Any action to obstruct her would be a violation of that duty. The best path forward is to acknowledge the new reality." It was the final nail in Brent's coffin, the defection of the most respected neutral member on the board. The support he thought he had evaporated in an instant. The other board members, seeing which way the wind was now blowing, began to nod in agreement, their faces a mixture of fear and a desperate desire to get on the right side of the new power. Brent looked around the room at the faces of the people who had laughed at his jokes and applauded his ruthlessness. He saw no allies. He saw only vultures ready to feast on a new carcass. He was utterly, completely alone. He slumped into his chair at the head of the table, the fight finally gone out of him, replaced by a hollow shell of defeat. Kate walked the final few feet until she was standing behind the chair he occupied. Her chair. She placed her hands on the back of it. "Mr. Covington," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute finality. "Last night you felt it was necessary to make a public spectacle of my termination. You wanted satisfaction. You wanted everyone to see your power." She paused. "I, however, prefer discretion. I'm not interested in humiliating you. I'm interested in healing this company." She looked around the table. "My first act as chairperson of the board and acting CEO will be to reverse the Dayton plant closure. My second will be to reinstate the Peterson Foundation and double its funding. My third, she looked down at the top of Brent's head, is to address a personnel issue. Brent slowly lifted his head, his eyes pleading, pathetic. The shark had become a guppy. Kate. Miss Peterson, please, he stammered. I have given everything to this company. You have taken everything from this company, she corrected him, her voice devoid of emotion. You took its heart, its loyalty, and its good name. You took a legacy and tried to melt it down for scrap. You were right about one thing you said last night. There is no place in this organization for someone with your breathtaking incompetence and poor judgment. She leaned down, her voice, a whisper meant only for him, but in the silent room everyone heard it. You demanded I be fired on the spot. But I'm going to offer you a kindness you never offered me. You can resign effective immediately, or you will be terminated for cause. Either way, consider this your last day at Peterson Global. Your security credentials have already been revoked. An escort is waiting outside to accompany you to your office to collect your personal belongings. And only your personal belongings. She used his own words, his own tactics, and turned them back on him with surgical precision. It wasn't an angry outburst. It was a calm, calculated execution. Brent Covington, the titan of industry, the master of the universe, looked like a broken man. He pushed his chair back, stood up on unsteady legs, and for the first time seemed small in the cavernous room he had built for himself. He didn't look at Kate. He couldn't. Without another word, he turned and walked the long walk of shame out of the boardroom. The double doors opened to reveal two uniformed security guards who fell into step beside him. The doors clicked shut, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than any shout. Kate Peterson looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. For a moment, she saw her father, sitting there smiling at her with pride. She blinked, and the image was gone. She pulled the chair out, walked around it, and sat down. It fit perfectly. She looked at the stunned faces of her new board. All right, she said, her voice ringing with a new and undeniable authority. Let's get to work. In the weeks that followed the story of Brent Covington's spectacular fall and Catherine Peterson's astonishing rise became the stuff of legend on Wall Street. It was whispered about in exclusive clubs, analyzed in financial papers, and repeated with a sense of karmic satisfaction by the thousands who had been burned by Covington's brand of corporate raiding. Brent vanished from the public eye, his name becoming a cautionary tale about arrogance. George Maxwell and two other Covington loyalists on the board resigned to pursue other opportunities within a week. But Kate had no time to revel in her victory. The victory itself was just the beginning of the war to rebuild her father's legacy. She worked with a ferocious intensity that surprised everyone, yet it was a different kind of energy than Brent's. Where he had been driven by ego, she was driven by purpose. She didn't command, she collaborated. She didn't dictate, she listened. Her days were a whirlwind of meetings. She met with department heads, union leaders, and engineers. She walked the factory floors, including the now reopened Dayton plant, where she was greeted not as a distant CEO, but as a liberator. She ate lunch in the company cafeteria, listening to the concerns and ideas of the very people Brent had dismissed as fat to be trimmed. She learned their names, their stories. She was building her company from the ground up, just as her father had intended. Walter Hemmings was her constant shadow, her mentor, her guide through the labyrinthine complexities of the vast corporation. He watched with quiet pride as the principles Arthur Peterson had instilled in him were now being championed by his daughter. Maria Flores, seeing the genuine substance behind Kate's coup, became her most staunch and effective ally on the board, her pragmatism now in service of a vision she could believe in. One cool evening, about a month after the boardroom confrontation, Kate's driver pulled up, not to her apartment, but to the familiar, elegant entrance of Aria Ristorante. She had made a reservation under a different name. She walked in alone, dressed not in a power suit, but in simple, elegant civilian clothes. The maître d' didn't recognize her at first, leading her to a small, discreet table for one. The restaurant was buzzing with the same energy, the same clinking of glasses and low murmur of conversations. But for Kate, the air felt different. It was no longer a cage, it was just a room. She ordered a simple pasta dish and a glass of house red wine. As she was finishing her meal, the manager David was making his rounds. He approached her table, his standard professional smile in place. "Good evening, madam. I hope you enjoyed your meal." He began. Then he looked closer. His eyes widened in recognition, and a wave of panic washed over his face. He remembered her, the waitress from that horrible night. He thought she was here to make a scene, to complain. "You," he stammered, his face paling. I am so sorry about what happened. I had no choice, Kate held up a hand, and her smile was warm and genuine. "David, it's all right. Please sit down for a moment if you have time." Bewildered David hesitantly pulled out the opposite chair and sat. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," Kate said softly. "I came here to have a nice meal, and to thank you." David stared at her, utterly confused. "Thank me for what I let that man bully me into firing you." "You were put in an impossible position," Kate said. "And I saw the look in your eyes that night. You didn't want to do it. You showed a decency that Brent Covington could never understand. That's why I'm here." She slid a business card across the table. It was simple, elegant, with the Peterson Global logo. Underneath her name, it read, "Chairperson and CEO." David picked it up. He read it once, then twice. His brain struggled to connect the woman he had fired with the name on the card, the name of the company that owned the building. He looked up at her, his mouth agape. "My first executive order," Kate continued, a hint of amusement in her voice, "was to draft a new lease agreement for Aria Ristorante. The new terms are considerably more favorable. Consider it a bonus for maintaining a staff that shows compassion under pressure. I also made a point of noting your excellent management in a memo to the real estate division. Your job is very, very safe, David." Tears welled up in David's eyes. He was speechless, overwhelmed by the sheer, surreal kindness of the moment. Why, he finally managed to ask. "Because my father taught me that a company's greatest asset is its people," Kate said, looking around the room. "All of its people. From the boardroom to the back alley. It's a lesson I had to learn on the ground floor, and it's a lesson I will never forget." She stood up to leave, placing enough cash on the table to cover her meal and a generous tip. She put her hand on David's shoulder for a moment. "Keep up the good work, David," she said. Then she turned and walked out, leaving him staring at her business card, a symbol of a world turned right side up. As she stepped out into the cool night air, Catherine Peterson took a deep breath. The city lights twinkled before her, no longer a symbol of a world that had cast her out, but a kingdom she was ready to lead. Not with an iron fist, but with an open hand. That single fateful night at Aria Ristorante set in motion a chain of events that proved one timeless truth: karma has a way of keeping receipts. For Brent Covington, his arrogance was the price he paid for his own downfall. For Catherine Peterson, her humility became her greatest weapon. This wasn't just a story of corporate revenge. It was a testament to the idea that true strength isn't found in how many people you can step on to get to the top, but in how many you are willing to lift up once you get there. It's a reminder that a legacy of integrity is worth more than any stock price. What did you think of Kate's ultimate power move? Do you believe people like Brent Covington eventually get what they deserve? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and vindication, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to see that the little guy doesn't always lose, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for watching.